Effie Sangster was 17. For 2 years she had carried a plate up the back stair of Balcorrie House every single evening, and in all that time, not one of the fine people gathered in the front hall could have told you her name. Now there were 30 of them, 30 mourners in black, come from 3 counties, and not one could reach the room they needed. A dog stood in the way, the dead man's dog, and the factor, a hard man with a hard voice, said the thing that made the whole hall go cold. Then the beast will be shot at noon. I'll not have 30 mourners kept from a dead man's papers by a dog. The nephew nodded, so they sent the kitchen girl. Because no gentleman would cross that hall, they put a tray in her hands and told her to walk it up the stair, past the dog, and never mind the beast. And she went. Eyes down, not looking at it, not looking at anyone. If you were ever the one who came every single day, and no one saw it until they were gone, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this one warm something in you, take a moment and subscribe so the next one finds you. And do one small thing for me. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. I read them. I like to know who's out there in the dark listening now back to Balcorrie. It was spring in Perthshire in the year 1887. Late spring, the kind that can't decide. Green coming up the hills in the morning, and a cold rain by 4. Balcorrie House sat above the little village of Fettermore, grey stone and small windows, an old plain house that had never tried to be grand. And, for 3 days, it had held a dead man. Squire Menservants had died in his sleep, in his own narrow bed, with his boots by the door where he always left them. He was 61. He'd been the laird here for the better part of 40 years, and in all that time nobody could remember him raising his voice or his hand. He was a spare man. Orderly, the kind who wound his own clocks and mended his own pens and kept his accounts in a hand so small and neat it looked like the tracks of a bird. He was not a warm man. Let's be honest about him. He did not hug his relations. He did not remember children's birthdays. When the tenants came at the term day, he paid them fair and said little. People respected him. Nobody would have said they loved him, and I don't think he'd have known what to do if they had. There was one exception. One, the dog. Bran was a deerhound, 9 years old that spring, a great grey rough-coated creature, tall as a small pony at the shoulder, with a long sad face and eyes the colour of wet slate. The squire had raised him from a pup. And every evening, without a single exception that anyone could name, at 6 o'clock, Menservants fed that dog by his own hand. Not from a bowl on the floor. That was the thing. He fed him from a plate. A chipped white plate, old, a hairline crack running through the glaze like a river on a map. He'd set it down on the hearthstone of the small library, and he'd portion out the dog's supper onto it with his own fingers, piece by piece, and Bran would wait, sitting, trembling a little with the wanting of it, but waiting, until the old man said the one soft word he only ever said to the dog, and then Bran would eat. 6 o'clock. The small library, the chipped white plate. 9 years. Now hold on to that room, the small library, because it matters. It was where the squire kept his papers. His desk sat under the window, his account books lined one wall, and in the locked drawer of that desk, along with everything else that mattered in a landed man's life, lay his will. That's the room the dog would not leave. And now let me tell you about Effie. She had come to Balcorrie 2 years before, from a croft over the hill where there were too many mouths and not enough meal. She was small and quick and plain, with reddish hair she kept scraped under a cap and hands already going rough at 17. She was the kitchen girl, the scullery girl, really, the lowest paid pair of hands in the whole indoor staff. She scrubbed the pots. She blacked the range. She carried the coal. She was up before the birds and abbed after the moon, and in between she did the 1,000 small, invisible things that a house eats and never thanks. And every evening, at a little before 6, Mrs. Crake the housekeeper would nod at her, and Effie would take up the squire's supper things and carry them up the narrow back stair to the small library. That was all. That was her whole part in the great man's life. She set the tray on the side table. Sometimes he said thank you, and sometimes he did not, and either way she didn't mind, because she was 17 and glad of the place, and she did not expect to be spoken to. Here's the thing about Effie you have to understand. She did not think she mattered. Not falsely, not for show. She simply did not. In her own mind she was a pair of hands that carried things. She could not have imagined that anyone in that house, living or dead, had ever truly seen her. And that not being seen, is the whole of it. Remember it. So 3 days the squire lay in the front parlour, and the county came to look at him. And on the 3rd day they carried him down to the kirk at Fettermore and put him in the ground next to his wife, who had gone 20 years before. And when the men came back from the kirk, wet and solemn, and the whole company crowded into the front hall to warm themselves and wait, that is when they found the dog would not move. Bran had planted himself in the passage outside the small library, lying down but not resting, his head up, his eyes on the door. And when the first of them tried to step past him toward that door, he rose, slow, silent, and he stood across the way with his head lowered, and a sound came out of him from somewhere deep, and the man stopped where he was. Somebody said, in the way people say a thing they don't really think about, somebody used to take the master's supper up to that room, of course. And somebody else said, "Aye, who was it then?" And there was a little pause, and nobody could quite recall. They let it go. There were bigger matters. Because here is what was waiting on the other side of that library door. The will. Alasdair Menteith had died worth £14,000, the house, the land, the tenanted farms, the money in the Perth bank. £14,000, which in that year was a fortune to make a man for life, and the reading of the will, the settling of who got what, was fixed for that very afternoon, in that very house, by the family's solicitor, who had come out from Perth in a hired trap, and now stood by the fire with his black bag and his watch. 30 relatives had travelled for it, some of them a hard 2 days' journey. Aunts and cousins and a great-nephew and the whole long tail of a landed family that suddenly had a reason to remember it was a family. They had come for the reading, and the papers for the reading were in the desk, and the desk was in the small library, and the small library was behind a door that a 9-year-old deerhound would not let a living soul approach. You see the shape of it now. The first to try was a pair of menservants, big lads, both of them, farm-bred, not easily put off. The under-butler sent them up with the notion that 2 men together could simply walk the dog aside, or step over it, or shift it by the collar if it came to that. Practical, sensible, they got within 4 feet. Bran came up off the floor without a hurry in the world, and he put himself square in the passage, and the hackles rose all along that great grey back in a ridge, and he showed them what he had. And it was not a snap, and it was not a fury. It was worse than that. It was a low, steady certainty, a wall of a sound, a promise. And the 2 big lads, who feared very little in this life, looked at each other and backed away down the passage with their hands up, and neither of them was ashamed to do it. That was the first wave. Now they knew it was real. The factor tried next. Duncan Kerr, the estate manager, a square, hard, practical man of 50 who had run Balcorrie's land for the Squire for 20 years and who solved problems the way you'd expect such a man to solve them, directly and with whatever tool came to hand. He fetched a rope, a slip loop, the kind you'd use on a beast that wouldn't be led. His notion was to drop it over the dog's head from a safe arm's length and simply haul it back. "It's a dog," he said, "to nobody, to everybody. It'll go where it's pulled." He came at it sideways, the loop held out, murmuring the low, false, easy words a man uses on a nervous horse. and Bran let him get closer than the servants had, let him get the rope near. And then the great head came round, and the lips peeled back off teeth as long as your thumb, and the dog snarled the rope out of Duncan Kerr's hand and sent it whipping across the flags. And the factor stepped back so fast he trod on the solicitor's foot. 2 tries, 2 failures, and now the hall was watching, all 30 of them, and a kind of unease was moving through the black-clad crowd like a drought under a door. The third to try was an aunt. A great-aunt, in fact, a formidable old woman, named, well, they called her Aunt Margaret, and she had buried 2 husbands and feared nothing on God's earth. She had watched the men make a mess of it, and she had that look old women get when they think a thing wants a woman's sense. "You've frightened the poor creature," she said. "It only wants kindness. Watch." And she went at Bran the way you'd go at a lapdog. Bent right down to its level. Face near its face, both hands out in front of her, palms up, fingers spread, wiggling, and a high cooing coming out of her. There now, good dog, good boy. Come away now, reaching those 2 open hands straight toward the animal's head. And Bran's hackles rose higher than they had for either of the men. Because, and hold this, because this is the secret of the whole thing. Sitting right there in plain sight, every single one of them was doing it wrong in exactly the same way. They came at the dog, head on, face to face, hands out and open and reaching, eye to eye. To Bran, every one of them was a thing advancing on him, straight at him, wanting something, and it told him, clear as a bell, that the wrong thing was happening, that the world was out of its proper order, and the more they came, the more certain he grew of it, and the harder he held his ground. Aunt Margaret snatched her hands back just in time and retreated with what dignity she had left, which was not much, and somewhere in the crowd a young cousin laughed and was hushed. And it was just then that the mantel clock in the front hall struck, a soft old chime, 5 o'clock, and an old shepherd of a mourner, standing near the wall with his cap in his hands, said quietly to the man beside him, "The beast watches yon clock." See it? It watched the clock when it struck. Nobody paid him any mind. Why would they? But you keep it. The clock. The dog watched the clock. Now the afternoon was getting on, and the solicitor was looking at his watch, and 30 travelled relations were tired and cold and beginning to mutter, and the fine simple matter of reading a dead man's will had become a siege. And that is when Gilbert Menteith decided he had watched enough. Gilbert was the nephew, the heir presumptive. The man the whole company understood was very likely to walk out of that library the master of Balcorrie and £14,000, once somebody got the cursed door open. He was perhaps 35, well-fed, well-tailored, with the smooth confidence of a man who has never in his life been told no by anyone he considered beneath him. And to Gilbert, every one of the failures he'd just watched had one cause. Nobody had shown the animal a master. "You've none of you the trick of it," he said, and he handed his gloves to a cousin, and he straightened his black coat, and he walked at the dog the way a man walks at a servant who has forgotten his place. Chest out, chin up, straight down the middle of the passage, fast and hard, no fear in it and no doubt, one hand already lifting to point at the floor and command the beast down. "Down," he said. "Down, sir, away," and Bran did not go down. Bran planted his 4 feet and dropped his head and met Gilbert Menteith coming, and the sound he made this time was not the low warning he'd given the servants. It was a bay, full-throated, a great tolling cry out of the deep chest of a hound bred to bring down a stag, and it filled the stone hall and rang off the flags, and every soul in that company felt it in their own breastbone. And Gilbert Menteith, the heir, the master-to-be, the man who had never been refused, stopped dead, and then flinched back, one whole staggering step, in front of 30 watching relatives. You could have heard a pin drop. Then you could hear the whispering start. His face went from white to red in the space of a breath, To be balked was one thing. To be seen balked, to recoil like a frightened boy in front of the very people over whom he was about to become lord and master, that was a wound Gilbert Menteith would not forgive. And a man that's shamed does not look for the truth of a thing. He looks for someone to blame, and something to break. "Cur," he said, and his voice was not quite steady. "This is past a joke. The animal's deranged with grief, or it's gone savage, and either way it's a danger to this household and an insult to my late uncle's memory. Deal with it." And Duncan Kerr, the factor, who liked a clean solution and a settled schedule, and who had had quite enough of being made a fool of by a dog, said the words that turned the whole day black. "Then the beast will be shot at noon." He took out his own watch and looked at it as though it had personally offended him. "I'll not have 30 mourners kept from a dead man's papers by a dog. Give it till noon tomorrow to come to its senses, and if it won't, I'll have my man bring the gun and we'll do the thing properly and be done." Now, you would think, hearing that the whole county would rise up, and I'll tell you, they nearly did, in their hearts. Because this was not a hard age, whatever you've heard. This was the age that had passed laws against cruelty to beasts. This was Scotland, where the story of the wee dog that sat 9 years on his master's grave was told at every fireside and wept over by every child. There was not one person in that hall who liked what Duncan Kerr had just said. You could see it in their faces. A recoil, a softening, an old woman's hand going to her mouth. But here is the terrible small truth of people. Not one of them would cross the hall to stop it. Because to stop it, you had to get past the dog, and they had all just watched 5 grown people driven back from that passage, one after another, the last of them the heir himself. So they stood there, 30 of them, sorry to their bones and useful to no one, and they let the sentence stand. Noon tomorrow. The gun. And the dog lay back down across the library door and watched them all with those slate-grey eyes. And waited. For what? That was the question that now ran round the hall in 100 low voices, and every voice had a different answer. The superstitious ones, and there were more of those than would admit it, said it was an omen. A dog does not do this. A dumb beast does not hold a house at bay for a locked door. There was a judgment in it, they whispered. The old man's spirit was in the creature, or working through it. He was not done with them. He was keeping them from something, or he was telling them something, and it boded ill for the family either way. The Reverend, who had come up from the kirk and stood warming his coat-tails at the fire, took a gentler line. "It grieves," he said. "That is all. A faithful creature grieves for the hand that fed it, and it has gone to the last place it knew him, and it will not be moved, because it does not understand that he is gone. It is not an omen, and it is not a danger. It is love, and it is loss, and I would sooner you left the poor thing be." He looked hard at Gilbert when he said it. There is no Christian need to shoot a dog for loving a dead man. But the Reverend counselled patience, and Duncan Kerr counted the hours, and Gilbert Menteith nursed his shame by the window and wanted, more than he wanted the £14,000 even, for that animal to be gone and the whole humiliating scene erased. And the afternoon light went thin and grey in the small windows, and the reading of the will did not happen. And 30 relatives settled in to a cold and unwilling night at Balcorrie, with nothing resolved. It was Mrs. Crake who broke it, the housekeeper, and she did it without the least idea of what she was doing. Mrs. Crake was a stout, upright, iron-corseted woman of the old school, whose whole religion in this life was propriety. And propriety was under siege. There were 30 guests in her house, grieving, quarrelling, hungry, cold guests, and they were being made to sit in a hall like refugees while a dog held the master's rooms. It was not to be borne. Above all, she needed the key to the small library's cupboards and a tray of hot tea sent up to the little morning room beyond, so that the solicitor at least might have somewhere decent to lay out his papers when this madness ended. The house had to keep running. Death or no death, dog or no dog, the house had to keep running. A tray must go up, she declared, to the hall at large. Key or no key, dog or no dog, I'll not have this house shamed with cold rooms and no tea while the gentry sit here like tinkers. A tray goes up that stair within the hour. And who's to carry it? Said Duncan Kerr, dry as a stick, past yon. He tipped his head at the great grey shape across the passage. You'll not get a man of mine within a rope's length of it, and you've seen why. And Mrs. Craik opened her mouth and shut it again because she saw the trap of it. No manservant would go. The maids were half of them in tears and the other half useless with fright. The gentlemen had had their fill of that passage. There was in the whole crowded house exactly one person who could be told to carry a tray up that back stair and would simply do it because she was told. And because it was, after all, the thing she did. The kitchen girl, Mrs. Craik said slowly. Send up the kitchen girl. There was a little murmur at that. Somebody said it wasn't fit to send a slip of a lass at a beast that had turned back 5 grown folk. But the murmur died quick, the way such murmurs do when the alternative is to go yourself. And Mrs. Craik stood a moment with a strange look crossing her stout red face, a groping half-formed look, like a word on the tip of the tongue. It's queer, she said, half to herself, but there was always someone took his supper things up of an evening. To that very room, every night, regular as the clock. Now who was it? And she frowned, and the thought would not quite come, and she let it go, because there was a tray to be filled and a house to be run. Never mind, fetch the girl. And they fetched the girl. Down in the kitchen, Effie Sangster had heard the whole day come to her in scraps, the dog, the door, the will, the gun at noon, the way news comes to a scullery, sideways and second-hand, and always late. She had thought it very sad about the dog. She had liked the dog, in the small distant way she liked most things, from a great gulf of not being noticed. She had fed it scraps once or twice on the sly, and been careful not to be caught at it. When Mrs. Craik came down and said she was wanted, and what for, Effie's stomach dropped clean to her boots. She was to carry a tray up the back stair. Past the dog that had bade a grown man off his feet not 2 hours since. She did not argue. It would not have crossed her mind to argue. She was the kitchen girl, and she was told to carry a tray, and so she would carry the tray, and if the dog savaged her on the stair, then that was a hard thing, but there it was. She wiped her hands on her apron. She did not think, I am brave. She did not think, I am special. She thought, plate up, tea's getting cold, mind the third step where it's loose. She loaded the tray, the good pot, the cups, the little covered dishes. It was heavy, a proper laden tray, and it took both her hands and her whole attention to balance it, and that, though not one living soul in that house understood it yet, was the beginning of the answer to everything. She came up the back stair and out into the passage that ran along to the small library, and there before her 30 faces turned as one. The whole grand grieving company, packed into the hall, fell silent to watch the kitchen girl walk to her death or her salvation, they hardly knew which. And there, across the library door, lay the dog. Effie did not look at it. Understand, she did not look at it out of any cunning. She had no plan. She was not thinking, if I don't meet its eye, it won't strike. She simply had a heavy tray in both hands, and a job to do, and her whole care was on not spilling, and on minding her feet on the worn old flags. Her eyes were down, where a servant's eyes had learned to be. She held the tray up before her, both hands full, nothing reaching, nothing open, nothing coming at anyone, and she set off across that hall on the exact diagonal line she had walked 1,000 evenings, from the foot of the back stair across the corner of the passage toward the door of the small library, because that was the way to the room, and that was the way she always went, and her feet knew it in the dark. She came level with the dog, a yard away, no more. She did not slow. She did not speak. She did not turn her head. She walked past Bran the way you walk past the doorpost of your own home, without a thought on Tuesday, the way she had walked past him with the master's supper, on 100, on 1,000 ordinary evenings, hands full, eyes down, on the line and toward the door. And 30 people held their breath, and the great grey dog lifted its head. It lifted its head, and it got to its feet. Not with a snarl, not with the low bay that had thrown back 5 grown people that day. It rose the way an old dog rises when it hears a thing it knows. Slow, sure, the great grey shoulders came up off the flags, and Bran stood, and he turned his long head after the girl with the tray, and he followed her. Nobody breathed. 30 people stood in that hall like figures cut from black paper, and the only sound was Effie's soft-soled feet on the stone, and behind her the click of long claws keeping time. She did not know he was there. That was the thing none of them could credit. She walked her line to the small library door, and the dog walked at her heel, and she never once looked back. She reached the door. It was shut. She had a tray in both hands and could not open it, so she stopped, the way she always stopped, and waited for it to be opened for her, the way it always was. And Bran sat down beside her, at her side, facing the room. Somebody in the hall made a sound then. A woman. A small broken sound, half a sob and half a word, and it broke the spell, and all at once the whole company was talking, low and fast and frightened. It chose her. Did you see it? Did you see the beast rise? It never so much as looked at Gilbert. It rose for the kitchen lass. Mrs. Craik came forward through the crowd. Her face was the colour of tallow. She reached past Effie and turned the handle and pushed the library door open on its cold, dark room, and Effie carried her tray in and set it on the desk under the window, and turned, and only then, turning, did she see the dog sat in the doorway, looking up at her. "Oh," said Effie. "It's you." That was all. "It's you." As though they had met on the stair, as though it were nothing. She did not understand yet what she had done. You must hold on to that. She had done nothing. She had carried a tray to a room, which was her whole trade and the sum of her importance in that house, and a dog she had passed 1,000 times had got up and come with her, and to Effie that was no more a miracle than the kettle coming to the boil. But to the 30 people in the hall it was a sign from the other side of the grave. Duncan Kerr found his voice first. The factor was a hard man and a practical one, and a practical man hates nothing so much as a thing he cannot explain. He came to the library door, but he came no further, for the dog turned its head and watched him come, and he stopped on the threshold. "Girl," he said. "Effie, that's your name?" "Yes, sir. You'll take that animal out of here, lead it to the stable and shut it in. We've the reading to do, and the solicitor waiting since noon, and 30 of the family stood in that hall on a dead man's account." He drew a breath. "You've a way with it. Take it out." Effie looked at the dog. The dog looked at her. "I haven't any way with it, sir," she said. "I only carried the tray. Don't be foolish. It follows you. Take it out." "I could try, sir," she said doubtfully, "but I don't think it's me it wants." Now Gilbert Menteith came up behind the factor. Twice that day the dog had shamed him, once when it bayed him back before the whole hall, and now again rising for a scullery girl when it had planted itself against the master's own blood. His face was tight and white about the mouth. He was a man of 35 who had waited a long while to be somebody. And he had come 3 counties to be somebody at last, and a dog and a kitchen maid were making him nobody in front of every relation he had. "It's a trick," he said. Effie looked at him. "She's worked it somehow. These girls, they'll feed a beast on the sly, win it over. She's made a pet of it behind my uncle's back, and now she'll play the wise woman." He pointed. "Make it stand for me." "Go on. If it comes to you, make it come to me. I'm the heir. If the creature has sense enough to choose, let it choose true." "I can't make it do anything, sir," said Effie. "I never trained it. I never fed it. I never touched it in my life before this hour." "Then how does it follow you?" "I don't know, sir, and that was the truth, and the truth was no use to anybody, because the whole hall wanted it to mean something, and Effie would not tell them it meant a thing when she did not know that it did." The old aunt, Aunt Margaret, who had buried 2 husbands and feared nothing living, pushed to the front on her stick. She had tried the dog herself that morning, hands out, cooing, and it had raised its hackles at her. Now she looked from the beast to the girl with her sharp old eyes. "Leave the child be, Gilbert," she said. "You'll not bully sense into a mystery. That dog knows something we don't. Beasts do. My mother had a collie foretold her own death, lay down on the doorstone 3 days before and would not eat. She thumped her stick. It's an omen. There's judgment in it." "There is no judgment in a dog," said the Reverend, coming up soft and grey and grieving. "There is grief in it. The poor beast mourns its master and will not leave the last room he sat in. Let it be. Give it time. It'll go to the girl because she's gentle, and the rest of you came at it like bailiffs." He laid a hand on Effie's shoulder. "You've done kindly, child. Sit by it a while. It'll quieten." So there they stood. The omen party and the grief party and the trick party, 3 counties of Menteiths arguing over a dog, and the solicitor from Perth sitting in the front hall by the fire with his black bag on his knees and the will locked in the drawer of the desk, not 8 feet from where they wrangled. And on the mantel of the front hall, the clock ticked. Mrs. Craik heard it. She turned her head to it, and a small crease came between her brows, the look of a woman reaching for a name on the tip of her tongue. "Someone always took his supper up," she said, half to herself, "to that room. Of an evening. His tray." She frowned harder. "It's the strangest thing. I keep the house and I cannot rightly say who it was. It was just done every day. It went up and it came down, and I never marked the hand that carried it. Nobody heeded her. They were arguing about omens. But you heed it. Hold on to it. Someone always took his supper up. She could not remember who. The afternoon wore on, and the dog would not be moved, and Gilbert Menteith grew from angry to cold, which is worse. He drew the factor aside by the cold hearth of the library, but not so far aside that the room could not hear, for he wanted it heard. "Kerr, this has gone past a joke. My uncle's 3 days dead, the family's travelled from 3 counties, and we cannot read the man's will because a dog sits on the drawer. You said noon. It's past noon. You said the beast would be shot." "I did," said Kerr, slower now. He had watched the dog rise for the girl, and something in him did not like what he was about to do, and did it anyway, because a practical man reaches for the practical thing. "I'll send for the gun." "No," said Effie. She had not meant to speak. It came out of her small and flat and certain, from the corner of the library where she sat on the floor, with her back to the account books and the great grey head resting now against her knee. Gilbert turned on her. "You've no voice here. He's not doing anything to anybody," said Effie. "He's only lying still. If you leave him, he'll do no harm. There's no call to shoot a dog for lying still. It's kept 30 people from a dead man's papers." "You could go in now," said Effie. "He's not stopping you now. He's here beside me. The door's open. You could walk in and take your papers, and he'd not stir." And that was so, and everyone saw it was so, for the dog lay quiet at the girl's knee, with the library door standing wide, and the drawer of the desk not a yard from Gilbert's own hand. But Gilbert Menteith did not go in. Watch this closely, for it is the whole of the man. He had shouted for those papers all day. He had raged at a dog and bullied a maid to reach them. And now the way was clear, and the dog was still, and the drawer was there, and he would not cross that threshold, because the beast lay in it, and he had been shamed by it once before the whole hall, and he could not bear to be shamed again if it rose. He wanted the will, he wanted it more than he wanted his dignity, but he could not make his feet carry him past the dog, and so he did the thing that frightened men do. He decided the dog must die, so that he need never test his own courage against it. "Send for the gun, cur," he said. "I'll not have it said the heir of Balcorrie was kept from his own by a brute. 6 o'clock. If it's not gone from that door by 6, shoot it where it lies. 6 o'clock." The words fell into the room, and only one creature in all that house understood them, and it was not a person. The clock in the front hall read 6:15. Duncan Kerr sent a man for the gun. They heard the outer door, and the wait began, and it was a terrible wait, for now there was a clock on it, and everyone could feel the clock. The mourners drew back against the walls of the hall. Aunt Margaret sat down heavily and gripped her stick. The Reverend began to pray, low, under his breath. Mrs. Craik stood wringing her apron and staring at the dog with that crease still between her brows, that name still just out of reach. Effie sat on the floor of the library with Bran's head against her knee, and she did not pray and she did not argue any more. She only put her hand, at last, on the dog's rough grey neck, because it seemed a poor thing that a creature should be shot at 6 with no living hand on it, and hers was the only hand there. "There," she said to it. "Soft, there, now." The man came back with the gun. He stood in the hall with it broken over his arm, not liking his work, waiting on the factor's word, and the factor waited on the clock, and Gilbert Menteith stood by the cold hearth with his jaw set, and 30 people watched a girl sit on the floor with a dog that had, one way or another, undone them all. And the clock in the front hall gathered itself, the way old clocks do, with a little whir before the strike. And it struck 6. 1, at the first stroke, Bran lifted his head from Effie's knee. 2, he got to his feet, not slowly now, quick, business-like, a dog with somewhere to be. 3, he turned from the girl they all swore he had chosen, and he crossed the library floor to the desk under the window where Effie had set the tray. And he looked at it, and it was only tea things, and it was wrong, and he turned from it. 4, he went to the cold hearth, the dead hearth, grey with 3 days' ash, where no fire had been lit since the master died. And there on the hearthstone, pushed to one side, forgotten in 3 days of death and mourning and dogs and arguments, sat a small white plate. Chipped, a hairline crack running through the glaze, an old plate, a plate from no good set, the kind of plate a house keeps for the dog. 5, Bran lay down beside it, nose to the plate. And he set his great head down on his paws, and he sighed, the long sigh of a dog settling to a weight he knows, and he fixed his eyes on the empty doorway where, every evening for 9 years. At the 6th stroke of that clock, a hand had come. 6, and nothing came. Because the hand that came was 3 days dead and carried to the kirk at Fettermore. And the dog lay by the chipped white plate and waited for it, as it had waited every evening of its life, and the room at last went utterly still. Mrs. Craik made a sound. It was not a sob. It was the sound of a thing coming clear. She had been reaching all day for a name she could not find, and the dog had just laid it in her hand. 6 o'clock, she said. Nobody understood her yet. She turned and went from the room, quick, for a heavy woman, and they heard her in the passage, and she came back within the minute with a book in her hands. A plain book. Grease at the corners. The kitchen day book, where the running of a kitchen is set down, the joints and the eggs and the candles, the small accounts of the small world below stairs that no gentleman ever reads. Her hands shook. She opened it and turned the pages back, and back, day upon day of a housekeeper's small hand, and she found the place, and she read aloud into that silent hall. Plate up 6. She turned a page. Plate up 6. Another plate up 6. Her voice was climbing now, thick, every day. Every single day. Here it is in my own book, and I never saw it for what it was. She looked up, and she looked straight at Gilbert Menteith, and then she looked at the dog by the plate, and then she looked at Effie sitting stunned on the floor. "That dog is not weighing your souls," said Mrs. Craik. "It is not choosing an heir. It is not mourning, and it is not mad, and it is no omen sent to any one of you. It is waiting on its supper, as it has waited every evening for 9 years. The master fed it here by his own hand at 6 o'clock off that plate, every day, in this room, and when the clock struck it came to be fed. That is all it has ever done. That is all it is doing now." She held up the book. "And there is the one hand in this house that ever carried that plate up the back stair. 2 years, it's been her. Before her, another girl. The appointment's older than the child that keeps it. 9 years that dog has been fed at 6, and for 2 of them it was Effie Sangster carried it up, every evening past that very door, and none of you ever saw her do it, because none of you ever see the girl with the tray. The hall did not speak. You could hear the clock. You could hear the dog breathe. And Duncan Kerr, the factor, the practical man, went slowly white, because now he saw it, and once a practical man sees the workings of a thing he cannot unsee them, and he must speak them aloud or burst. "That's why," he said. "God help us. That's why none of us could cross it." He came a step into the room, staring at the dog, working it out for the whole company as it came to him. "We came at it wrong, every one of us. We came at it head-on, straight for the door, hands out, looking it in the eye, the 2 lads, and myself with a rope, and you, madam, with your hands up at its face, and you, Mr. Menteith, striding at it like a master at a servant. Every one of us came as a problem, a thing coming for the door. And a dog that guards a door will meet a thing that comes at the door." He turned. But the girl came the way the supper always came, sideways, not at the dog, past it. On her own old line, at her own old hour, hands full, eyes down, nothing reaching for it, nothing looking at it. She came exactly as 9 years of 6 o'clocks had taught it the supper comes. So the beast did what it always does when the supper comes by. It got up. And it followed the plate. He let out a breath. It never chose her. It couldn't tell you from Adam girl, it only knew the way the tray moves. And you were the tray. And there it was, laid bare in the cold library before 30 travelled mourners. No oracle, no judgment, no sign from beyond the grave. A timetable, an old dog and an old clock and an old plate, and a girl so far beneath their notice that she had walked the one path the dog would follow, precisely because nobody had ever thought her worth the seeing. The omen party had nothing to say. Aunt Margaret sat with her mouth open and her collie story dead on her tongue. The Reverend bowed his grey head and murmured, "It's loyalty. Only loyalty. There's no darkness in it after all, the poor faithful thing," and he seemed almost sorry to lose the mystery, for men love a mystery better than a plate. And Gilbert Menteith stood by the cold hearth and looked at the dog he had ordered shot, and could not lift his eyes to the room. "Take the gun away," said Kerr quietly to his man. "Break it and take it out. There'll be no shooting in this house." The reading was done at last. The dog lay by its plate and troubled no one, and the solicitor from Perth came in with his black bag and unlocked the drawer of the desk, the drawer no one could reach till a kitchen girl carried tea to a dead man's room, and he drew out the will and read it to the standing hall. £14,000, the house, the land, the 3-county name. It went, all of it, to Gilbert Menteith, heir presumptive, now heir plain and proved. He should have been glad. An hour before he would have been glad. But the solicitor read on, for there was more, in the squire's own spare hand, a codicil set down not 2 years since. And forasmuch as my dog Bran has been my truer companion than any person living, read the solicitor, I charge my heir, whomsoever he be, to keep the said dog housed and fed and cared for at Balcorrie to the natural end of his days, and to keep in my service and in full wage whatsoever servant tends him, this charge laid upon the estate, and not to be set aside, on pain of forfeit of the same. The solicitor lowered the page. That is to say, Misty, Menteith, you inherit on condition. You must house the dog to its death, and you must keep and pay whoever feeds it. The estate is bound to it. You cannot take the one without the other. Nobody in that hall could help it. Every eye went, together, from Gilbert Menteith, master of Balcorrie, 3 counties, £14,000, to the dog by the plate, and from the dog to the girl who fed it. The man who had ordered the gun was bound by his uncle's dead hand to shelter that dog and to pay the wage of the one who tended it, and the dog had just shown the whole county, past all argument, whose hand that was. Gilbert's face, then. I'll give you his face, for he earned it. It went through anger first, a flush of it. The old insolence is the enemy reflex. And then it went still, as the thing closed round him, and he saw there was no door out of it. His uncle had reached out of the grave and tied the estate to a scullery girl's daily errand, and there was no lawyer in Perth could untie it. He opened his mouth. He shut it again, and at the last he gave one short nod, the smallest nod a proud man ever gave, to the girl on the floor. It was not kindness. It was surrender. But he gave it before the whole county, and the whole county saw. They offered Effie the place that evening, the solicitor and Mrs. Craik together. £12 a year, they said, and the gardener's cottage to live in her own name, for so long as she tended the dog. Or, if she'd sooner, a sum of money to go free and think no more of it. And here is the last thing, and the truest, and you must not miss it. They asked her, before she answered, would she say it? Would she stand up before the family and say the dog had chosen her, had known her worth, had named her, for it would make a fine story, and the county wanted a fine story, and it would settle her claim past any grumbling? No, said Effie. I'll not say that. It didn't choose me. It doesn't know me from the next girl. Mrs. Craik has it right. I was only ever the tray. She looked at the dog. I don't want the money to go. And I don't want to be somebody. I only, and she stopped and went red, for it was a small one to say out loud before grand people. I only want to keep carrying the plate up at 6. If that's the place, I'll take the place. For that, and she took it. Not for £12, and not for a cottage, and not to be, at last, a person the house could see. She took it to go on doing the invisible thing she had always done, to carry a chipped white plate up a back stair at 6 o'clock to a dog that could not tell her from any other pair of hands. She took the reward for the sake of the labour, which is a thing the grand people in that hall would never in their lives understand, and which the dog understood entirely. 6 months on, and it was autumn at Balcorrie, and the leaves came down over the 3 counties Gilbert Menteith now owned. At 6 o'clock the light was going. In the small library a fire was lit these days, for the room was in use again. And by the cold end of the hearth sat the chipped white plate, filled now, and carried up not 5 minutes since. Effie stood by the desk in a gown a little better than her old one, for £12 a year is £12, and she watched the clock on the mantel gather itself to strike. It struck 6, and the old grey dog, greyer now, stiffer in the shoulder, rose from the hearthrug at the first stroke, as he had risen every evening of 9 years, and now of 10, and he came to the plate, and he ate, and when he was done he leaned his big head against her side, not because he knew her, she'd tell you, but because that was the shape of 6 o'clock. And she rested her hand on him, and that was enough for Effie Sangster. That was the whole of what she'd ever wanted. They still tell it 2 ways in that country. Mind, in the parlours of the big houses they tell how the Squire's great hound saw into the hearts of 30 mourners, and turned back the false and the proud, the factor and the fine nephew, and rose only for the one pure soul among them, the humble girl, and named her before them all. It's a lovely story. They tell it well over the port, and it's mostly lies, and in the kitchens they tell it the other way. They tell how a dog kept an appointment, how 30 grand people came at a door head-on and hands out and could not pass, and how the only creature in that whole house who could cross the hall was the only one who had ever kept the hour, the girl nobody saw, who'd walked that line 1,000 nights with her eyes down and her hands full, and never once thought it mattered. That one's true. But it's told below stairs, so it's told quiet. Duncan Kerr is factor still, but they say of him now that when a hard little problem comes across his desk, he sits with it a moment longer than he used to. Before he reaches for the simple hard answer, for he reached for a gun once, and a kitchen day book made a fool of him before the county, and a man remembers that. And Gilbert Menteith is master of Balcorrie, £14,000 and all, and lord of 3 counties. But every evening at 6 o'clock, when the clock strikes and the plate goes up, the master of Balcorrie must give a small nod to the kitchen girl on the stair. His uncle's will binds him to it, and the whole county knows the tale, and he cannot get out of it while the old dog lives. He is the greatest man in the parish. And he must, each evening, acknowledge the least, which is the moral of it, if a plain story wants a moral. The hand that does the small thing daily, the hand nobody troubles to see, that is the hand the world must reckon with in the end, when all the loud and reaching hands have failed at the door. It only takes the seeing longer. If you've ever been the one who came every single day, and no one marked it till you were gone, tell me the town you carry your plate in. I'd like to know your name.